Live is entitled Islamic Sexology, and I'll be hopefully joined by Ustadha Iffet Rafeeq, who is a religiously trained Islamic teacher, and she also teaches courses on intimacy and marital wellness. I'll just add Ustadha. I think she should be here. So again, just for those of you who are joining today's Instagram Live, it's going to be a short one with Ustadha. Coming courses that Ustadha has, which will be running with Blue Lantern Institute. I'll try and type it here. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. I'm very excited about this conversation.
Likewise, thank you again. Sorry for the short notice, but I think it's important. Well, I thought it would also be useful to have this discussion to speak about your upcoming courses or seminars, sorry, starting tomorrow, inshallah.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, do you mind, because I want to quickly write in the comments as well, just so people know what we're talking about. Do you mind giving a quick high-level elevator pitch introduction to who you are and the work that you do?
Sure, I'd love that. Okay, Bismillah. So I'm Iffet Rafeeq, as Habib Kande has mentioned. I have trained, so I'm a student of Deen. I've trained in traditional Islamic sciences. So essentially my field is Islamic sciences first, and then I specialize in researching Islamic sexology or sexology in Islam. What happened is, as I was training to be a female scholar and I was working in the community, I realized there's actually so many problems that we're not trained to address in the Darul Ulooms and in the madrasas, i.e. things on marital well-being, intimacy in Islam, things like that. And there were a lot of questions that I couldn't answer as a trained graduate, as a trained scholar. So I went back and did some more research, and I realized Islam has a very rich and kind of flourishing information and tradition in Islamic sexology and how to encourage marital well-being. So that is my area of research, and I love it. I'm very passionate about it. I've seen how the community desperately needs it, and this is what we're doing now. I am also the co-founder of the Blue Lantern Institute. I founded that online institute with my husband, which is an online Islamic studies and well-being course platform where people come, join, they study mental health stuff, physical well-being stuff, food and nutrition, marriage courses, all alongside Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, and all of the traditional sciences as well.
MashaAllah. Again, just for the benefit for those people who are joining, I'm speaking to Ustadha Iffet Rafeeq, who is a traditionally trained Islamic teacher and lecturer on intimacy matters. Today we'll be speaking about her upcoming seminar with the Blue Lantern Institute, which starts tomorrow on the 4th of February. She's hosting 2 seminars, one on the 4th of February for women only, entitled Sensual Spiritual Women, which we'll talk a little bit about. And then the next seminar is on the 18th of February, I believe.
Yeah, it's the 18th.
Which is called Sexual Discipline. So again, please, if you're interested, again, we'll talk a little bit about what the seminar it will entail. But please check out the Blue Lantern Institute, and I'll save this live, and I'll tag them. But before
the link for the Blue Lantern Institute is in my bio. So you just click the link in my bio and click Blue Lantern, and the website will come up, and you'll have access to everything there.
Great. There was actually one thing I actually wanted to talk about, what you mentioned about, obviously after you trained in traditional Islamic sciences, you noticed that there was an issue in terms of like relationships and marital issues and stuff, and that there seemed to be a gap in terms of how do you help those who are in need within the Muslim community. How did you find your experiences studying at the Cambridge Muslim College? So I saw one video that you and Ustad did speaking about the cultural differences in translating traditional sciences to modern day audiences. How did you find that, and was that beneficial, that studying?
Yeah, I think Cambridge Muslim College was exactly what we needed to bridge that gap, because after graduating from the traditional seminaries, I went out into the community and I realized there was a huge gap in what we had learned and how we were teaching and preaching to people, and what people actually needed to hear in comparison to the years of training that we did on topics that maybe weren't relevant to the average Muslim person today. So then after a few years of community work, we went to Cambridge Muslim College, and that 1-year diploma that they have to train up traditional young Islamic scholars who graduate from the traditional seminaries, to train them up to be able to contextualize everything that they've learned in a way that they can now preach it to people, British Muslims specifically as well. So it was actually a really huge turning point in my life, where I realized all of the information I learned is not redundant. I can actually take all of that information. I just need to know how to word it, contextualize it, reframe it, and then teach it to people in a way that's relevant to them. Yeah, it was actually a really life-changing course. Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad has done a huge service to young students of Deen in Britain with that course.
Yeah, that's definitely, mashallah. And you know, interestingly enough, I actually saw a fatwa from the Sheikh. I think or someone published a fatwa that he gave in a course about, must have been maybe 10, 12 years ago. And he mentioned, because people were asking about intimacy, and he spoke about that there's a rich tradition in Islamic tradition of like speaking about intimacy matters and things like that. And he mentioned that hopefully there'll be someone from one of the seminars that might go on and actually study or write a book that's yeah. And that was one of the impetus for me actually wanting to also kind of delve into the subject, because you know, he obviously well versed, obviously studied in Azhar and also studied in the Islamic world, but then also to understand the traditional sciences, but also how to translate that to people in the UK or in the Western world. And like what you mentioned about contextualizing things, I think that's very important, because a number of times when I speak to, and Ustadha, he said the same thing when we had our IG live last year, and a number of imams and scholars I speak to, is that, okay, you've got this religious training, which is wonderful. You know, all of these stories and these hadiths and things like that. Not only the hadiths of the Prophet ﷺ, but these stories from medieval scholars. How do you, and you know that it's beneficial and useful, how do you translate that to modern day audiences where, in a way, like you mentioned about the framing and the language, where they feel that the Deen is relevant to their everyday lives.
That's
and
right.
I think that's very important. So that's why I think it's good, very important, the work that you're doing. And again, I think a number of like imams, they do talk about like a lot of their work does evolve around like counseling. So it's not really people asking what's the ruling in how to pray or how to pay zakat. It's a lot of it is like relationship issues. So that's why again, I think it's important, and it's great that not only you've got the traditional Islamic science and training, but also you furthered that, we supplemented that with modern day science in terms of, actually I wanted to ask you about the 5 love languages course that you offer on the Institute, and can you tell us a little bit about that and how people have received that?
Yeah, sure. So we do a few of these different types of courses where we're taking modern concepts that we can use in relationships, like the 5 love languages, and then we essentially what they're called are these hybrid courses. I like to call them hybrid courses, where we bring together a little bit of psychology, a little bit of sometimes biology and science and Islam, and we kind of bring them together on essentially how Islamic literature or Islam was taught a couple of centuries ago, when everything was amalgamated into one, and the scholars that would speak on a topic were polymaths in also science and maths and you know, astronomy and all of these things. So these hybrid courses are a way to help people understand and learn about Islam and learn about the Prophet ﷺ, whilst actually implementing and it benefiting them and giving them the tools to have you know, an easier, better life. So for 5 love languages is a relationships course where we take Dr. Gary Chapman's 5 love languages, the book that he wrote, and we make a comparison to the Sunnah and how the Prophet ﷺ practiced each of these love languages to different people in his life. Essentially, we learn how to engage with the people that are closest to us, but at the same time, without even knowing it, we're falling in love with the Prophet ﷺ. So yeah, that's one of our most popular courses. It's actually international, and we report it around the world. Yeah, it's doing really well.
And is that a course that is like, is it like an interactive live course, or can someone like purchase it and then like listen to it?
No,
Like,
that
does it have
one
to be live?
specifically, we did do it online a few years ago. I think we probably will do it online again soon, but right now it's an interactive face-to-face course.
Okay. And if people want to be informed of upcoming courses and seminars that you're doing, is there like a mailing list, or do they need to just follow you on Instagram? How would you
Yeah, so
advise people?
we do have a mailing list, but the easiest way usually is to follow our Instagram, the Blue Lantern Institute. This is where we share all of our courses. So this month, as you know, Habib, we're having Intimacy Month this February, Intimacy Month on the Blue Lantern, which means all of our members, all of the people who have signed up for this month will have access to 3 unique seminars. One is happening with the legend Habib Kande. One is happening with him. He's going to be talking about Islamic sexology and the pleasure gap, which is so important, I think, for Muslim women to be hearing about. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I'm going to be doing 2 of the seminars. So these 2 seminars, one is, as you mentioned, for sensual spiritual women, i.e., essentially bridging the gap between spirituality and sensuality. A lot of Muslim women are subconsciously taught that if you're a spiritual woman, then you're not a sensual sexual woman. And if you're a sensual sexual woman, then there's no way you could be a godly woman. So what we're doing is we're bringing, bridging the gap and actually reminding ourselves and creating new foundations of the fact that Islam does not operate on that basis. Islam does not operate on the basis of one or the other. Islam actually says you can use one to enhance the other. So just a basic example of sensuality and spirituality is food. We use food, and food has its parameters of halal and haram. And when you use food for good, it can fuel your ibadah, it can connect you with God, it can make you love God for all of the flavors that he's put into the world. And I think intimacy and sex is the same thing. It has its parameters, it has its halal and haram, and when it's used in the good way, it can be used to enhance our relationship and connection with God, because he created, just the way he created flavors, he created pleasure to be experienced, so that we could understand him as the one true God. So Sensual Spiritual Woman seminar is all about women reclaiming their sensuality alongside with their spirituality, and not feeling like they're at war with each other. And we're going to be going through some of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ in that seminar. And the second seminar is all about sexual discipline, which I know, Habib, you've shared some really interesting videos on your account regarding sexual discipline from a lot of men, speaking about how sleeping around is actually not healthy and it's not good for you. And there are so many repercussions that come with that. So I'll be speaking a little bit more about that as well.
MashaAllah. Again, just for the benefit for people, I can see people are joining. I'm speaking to Ustadha Iffet Rafeeq, who is the co-founder of the Blue Lantern Institute. She'll be conducting some seminars this month. The first one is starting tomorrow, on the 4th of February, for women only, entitled Sensual Spiritual Women. And then she'll also be conducting another seminar on the 18th of February called Sexual Discipline. Ustadha is a traditionally trained Islamic lecturer, teacher, and also she specialises in helping people with marital, improve their marital well-being and relationships, and general wellness, as well as intimacy and sexology in Islam. Great. The sexual discipline, that actually caught me off guard when I saw that he's actually going to speak about that. Why did you choose that topic, if you don't mind me asking?
Okay, so I actually posted...
And that title as well. I do like it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing.
The sexual discipline title I took from the videos that you shared, because it was posted on it was like the heading for one of you, and I really thought that's a good way of explaining what I've been trying to explain to younger women about understanding how the engaging or sleeping around or promiscuity affects our bodies. It affects, there are consequences of the energy exchange, there are consequences of the DNA exchange, there are consequences of the mental and psychological impact of being in a quick, fast relationship where there's no strong, solid foundation for you, and there's no emotional connection. So it's not specifically for women, it's actually for men and women, the sexual discipline course. And it's all about essentially learning that sexual discipline is an extension of self-care. And I think that everybody's talking about self-care, and everyone's talking about, especially with New Age spiritualism, there's this idea of what feels good now. So if it feels good to sleep around now, that's what I'm going to do, because that's what feels good to me, and I don't care how, what people can't judge me. And this whole people can't judge me thing, and I'm going to do what feels good in the moment, is actually destroying our discipline. It's destroying our long-term goals. It's destroying our mental health. It's destroying internal peace. And I've been seeing this a lot, especially with New Age spiritualism and the idea of, especially I think it happened with the 2023 New Year's resolutions. Everyone was talking about, I'm only going to engage with what feels good and what feels right, and actually sometimes the things that feel good and feel right are not actually good and right for us. It's just the nafs telling us, or the ego telling you, this is what you want. And we know this because Allah has said in the Quran, sometimes you will desire something that isn't good for you. and sometimes you'll not want something that is good for you. So the idea of bringing sexual discipline, which is a long-standing Muslim tradition, to have sexual discipline to preserve sanctity of the body and sanctity of the mind, which I don't think Muslims speak about a lot, is the sanctity. They put a lot of emphasis on sanctity of the female body. That's why she can't be promiscuous. But what about the sanctity of the mind of a man, or the sanctity of the body of a man? So sexual discipline, I think, because it's a long-standing Islamic tradition, I wanted to be able to talk about it and bring it back and speak about the fact that actually promiscuity is self-negligence. Promiscuity is an act of self-harm, if we really get down to the basics of it.
MashaAllah. I love that. I love that explanation. And yeah, even for myself, and even when you spoke about in the beginning of the live about like reframing language and contextualizing things, I've generally found, especially or if I'm again in reference to men or speaking to men, or for myself in particular, if you're looking at, or when you hear things like abstinence, that doesn't really sound as aspirational, if I'm honest. It's like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yes.
whereas if you look at a sexual discipline, this is something that you need to achieve. And as men, generally, again, we're quite goal orientated. So it's like the same way one needs discipline if they want to maybe get into shape or lose weight or what have you, and cut down certain foods. Also, sexual discipline, like you mentioned, there's a lot of benefits that even I think there's a lot of talk, especially nowadays when people speak about the so-called dangers and stuff about female promiscuity, but there's also effects and dangers about male promiscuity, because a lot of men, we have this, I would say, misunderstanding, not understanding that we can sleep around and it doesn't affect us. When it does, and it can affect us in more ways than we've kind of realized. So, and again, like you mentioned, in the Islamic tradition, sexual discipline, both before and during marriage and after marriage, if someone's divorced, it's still something that one needs to adhere to, because I think people kind of look at sexual discipline, I've noticed, especially in faith communities, as it's just about abstinence before marriage, and after that, you don't necessarily need to have sexual discipline. When in reality, if Allah's instructed us to lower our gaze and guard our private parts, that means that's a part of sexual discipline, because you're forcing yourself to do something that maybe naturally you've got some desires or inclination to do, something that you shouldn't be doing. You know, you might not realize the benefit straight away, but as human beings, male, female, married, unmarried, single, what have you, you have to practice some form of sexual discipline. I mean, I just think with that title, I definitely think it will attract a lot of men, or definitely more men. Whereas sometimes the language, or when I've heard educators or intimacy experts speaking to women, the language might be a bit different, like you mentioned about the self-care and stuff like that, or energy and things like that. Whereas for men, if I'm honest, that doesn't resonate as much, because you know, it doesn't, because we can perform the act and it doesn't, not every case we have a real emotional attachment or connection. We feel like, okay, it doesn't matter whether there's like an energy exchange, because I'm disconnected from it. But if you're looking at it from a discipline perspective, that whether it can affect you in terms of like aspiration, in terms of like health wise, whether in terms of like finances, in terms of your relationship with Allah, there's different reasons why people practice sexual discipline. You know, and something that, like you mentioned about the scholars of the past, they were polymaths, so they didn't just speak about Islamic law, theology, they're well versed in different sciences and the social norms that were going on around the people. And that's something I think we need to kind of follow their mantle in that respect by learning the other disciplines, whether it's like the social sciences, like psychology, sociology, anthropology, and things like that. And so that's why, I was really impressed, to be honest, that you took that title and you used it. And I just want to hear your thoughts. No, honestly, because
it's really interesting that you've said that now, because I actually resonated more with sexual, I don't know, maybe it's my temperament, but I resonated more with the title sexual discipline than I would with sexual self-care, or than I would with like sexual abstinence. So I personally gravitated towards, when I saw the video on your account, the few videos on your account regarding it, I thought, oh, this is something I can strive towards. This is something that seems like a higher standard of living, and I want to be at a higher standard of living. So because I was drawn to it, I think that's why I picked it. But it's really interesting that you've mentioned that women would probably go towards the idea of sexual self-care, and men would go towards achieving a higher standard, which is, that's really interesting.
So no, that's great. I'm glad that it kind of resonated, because normally, because those videos, I'm kind of thinking of about men, or what would kind of resonate with myself. And then sometimes I do get messages, why are you saying this? Or it's about energy exchange and things like that. And I'm like, yes, that may be the case, but for some people that doesn't connect with, and that's why it's
No,
important to
yeah.
understand the
I feel like
audience.
the wording is everything, and I think Muslims generally, we should be striving for a higher standard. That should I think standards and just a quality of life. I think everyone should be striving towards that. You know, it's really interesting what you mentioned about people believe that they have to have sexual discipline before marriage, and then they don't need it after marriage, which is so interesting because you've mentioned this in one of your books that the Prophet ﷺ said that whenever you see a woman outside and you find her attractive, go home and be intimate with your wife and go have sex with your wife. And essentially what we're understanding is human nature here, that human nature is to see beauty, appreciate it, and think, okay, I want to have access to it. But what is the sexual discipline parameters? It's okay, turn that energy, move it, and use it towards like getting intimate with your wife, which is sadaqah for you. There's a reward in it for you. It's a protection for you. Increases intimacy between you and your wife. There's just so many rewards for it. But the idea of not believing that you need to practice sexual discipline when you're married, whilst you're married, I think is definitely lost in Muslim community.
And it plays into the conversation, which now I think a lot of Muslims are more comfortable to have the conversation about like porn addiction and sex addiction, like, even within marriage. But for some reason, it's like I've noticed more Muslims are comfortable to have the conversation about addressing porn addiction as opposed to how to practice sexual discipline or how to like increase marital wellness.
It's
that's something
like
that
we're dealing with the problem. We're okay with dealing with the problem, but not trying to prevent it happening in the first place.
Yeah. I know. I mean, I know there's different theories and understandings in terms of whether sex addiction is a true like illness or not. But because I know in some cases, and the way I look, I think some men, they use it as an excuse for bad behavior. Yes. So some men will say, I've got a sex addiction, I can't help myself. It's just like, no, you lack discipline. That's kind of what it is. And the same way in terms of like with porn, it's like, I can't help myself. There's beautiful women everywhere I need to look. It's like, you don't have to look. You want to look, and you are looking, so you're choosing to do something. And if you were to reframe it as in, maybe I lack discipline, so I need to be more disciplined, then, okay, even though maybe you have the desire to look, you will then choose not to. So again, that's why, and I'm looking forward to actually that seminar on the 18th.
Yeah, I think essentially just knowing that you're human. So we cannot have this impression that, okay, if I'm a Muslim and I pray 5 times a day and I'm really striving for God, that I'm never going to slip up. Like you're Muslim, you're married, you've been married for a few years, life gets, you get into the same habits, you've got children, you've got stresses, you've got mortgages to pay. Give yourself a break. You're going to mess up at some point. But the idea is that, the Prophet ﷺ has told us whenever we sin or we make an error, we follow it up with a good deed and it expiates the sin, right? So it's having that kind of compassion with yourself, and also knowing what the Prophet ﷺ has said about, like, when you see somebody, turn and go home to your wife and, be intimate with your wife, it will release that tension from you so that you don't do anything silly. So I think sexual discipline is going to be a conversation about understanding your humanness, understanding that you cannot be perfect all the time, but if you practice sexual discipline, you can really avoid a lot of mistakes that will be self-harming for you.
Yeah, great. And what I love about the hadiths of the life stories of not only the Prophet, peace be upon him, but also the companions, is that when the companions were to go to the Prophet ﷺ after they've committed like a sin, especially a sexual sin, he never chastised them or like was, how could you do it? Sometimes he's smart and like he offered them a way out, seek forgiveness from Allah, continue to practice good deeds. There was always a way out. It wasn't a case of berating them. How could you? I'm surprised, or someone saying they're addicted to, like, whereas nowadays, unfortunately, in a lot of masajids, I think people find it difficult, especially if they're Muslim or religiously inclined, to go to a scholar or a sheikh because they feel they're going to be like if someone were to say, like, I'm laughing because humor's a way of how I deal with things. If I don't laugh, I probably will cry for them. But I saw a fatwa when someone was asking, I'm not going to mention the website's name, but it was a prominent website. And there's a gentleman that asked the question that I'm suffering from porn addiction, but I'm not married, and how can I overcome this? The response, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How can you be suffering from porn addiction when you're not married? How can you do this when it's like, and then reciting verse from the Quran and saying this is haram, and just like the person is looking for help. The person who's looking at it, he knows what he's doing is haram. They don't need you to tell them that. It's to help them. What can they do in terms of remedy
That's
that
right.
situation? And also, is there a way out? And of course, there is a way out, and there's also the forgiveness from Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. So I just think that that kind
I
of
think
message.
reactions like that are causing cognitive dissonance. Like it's
Yes.
making Muslims put everything in boxes. Okay, sex life is completely separate. My
Yeah.
work life is completely separate. The woman at work is really hot and I'm going to chat to her, but I'm going to go home and
Yeah.
my wife is going to be in a completely separate box. Like everything's in boxes, and especially with the intimacy side and porn addiction and relationships and spirituality and prayer and ibadah and you seeking knowledge, they're in completely separate lives, and then we get cognitive dissonance from this. It's a
Yeah.
real problem.
Yeah. And yeah, I just want the last thing I'll take. I'm conscious of time, and I know we said we won't take more than half an hour, 45 minutes. I just wanted to say that, and again, just for the benefit of the people that are listening now live or going to listen, hopefully when I save this, I think it's important that people sign up for this workshop and attend. Not particularly mine, because you probably heard most of what I've got to say, but definitely for your seminars. And I think it's important both for men and women alike, obviously women to attend your workshop and also for men to attend your workshop on the sexual discipline. I think one of the reasons, not only because obviously you're well versed in this particular subjects and you're an authority in this matter, but I think it's important for Muslims to be able to, especially Muslim and Muslim women as well, to be able to receive information about intimacy matters from women. Because I think oftentimes there is this idea that they need to only take this knowledge from a man, whereas I think women who are obviously competent and qualified and got expertise in this subject, they're just as capable, and also they've got different insights that men we don't actually have. We've got blind spots. And so that's why I just think that, and that's also I wanted to obviously share that publicly rather than just saying it's kind of privately for people to kind of know. Because most of the work that I've learned from has been from women. I just think that it's important that as Muslims, I mean, if you're someone who feels that a woman is incapable of providing this information from a Islamic perspective, that's incorrect. And there are examples. There's actually one particular hadith which I can't believe I forgot to include it in my book, but it's something that I'm going to speak about hopefully more on the 26th, 26th, sorry. It's the hadith when Amra bint Abdul Rahman, who was a scholar, female scholar, a student of our mother Aisha, may Allah be pleased with her, and she asks Aisha, after obviously the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away, how did the Prophet make love to his wives? Kaifa kana yasna Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam idha jama'a nisa'ahu. It's an explicit question. And Aisha responded that he was the most kana alyanu nas wa akrabu nas dihakan bisam. He was the most affectionate and most generous of men, always laughing and smiling. It's a beautiful hadith. And like we heard the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to mend, you know, his clothes when he was in the house. We hear about these hadith, but this particular hadith, for some reason, we don't really hear about it. And I came across it from there was a book that was written in the 9th century by Abdul Malik ibn Habib, and he wrote a book called Adab al-Nisa, and he spoke about the ethics and etiquette in terms of not only women but how to treat women. And this was one of the hadith that he kind of narrated. And again, for me, just even thinking about the hadith, there's so many things that we can learn from it. This is an example of a woman asking an intimate question to another woman, and the woman teacher, the female teacher, providing knowledge and advice and instruction to her female pupil. And obviously it was a safe space because obviously it was amongst women. And also for the woman to realize this is kind of what this should be the expectation, this is what she deserved, what she should receive in terms of intimate matters. Because it's all well and good speaking about, you know, you're entitled to dwell in like house and you're entitled to, but in terms of intimacy, women have got just as much of a right as well as men. So that again, that's a really beautiful hadith that I don't know why I forgot to include it in my books, but that's something that I was always inspired by.
Another one for us,
yes,
please.
it's amazing hadith because again, you've got examples and there are others which I'm sure we'll cover in both of our seminars, but of people in the past speaking about these matters, because I think for a number of Muslims, they feel that, oh, okay. And again, I understand if you're uncomfortable going to a man, you've got women who are more than qualified who can provide this information, knowledge, and advice. You know, so that's why I think that there are examples that we can kind of learn from and kind of be inspired by. So I just wanted to mention that. Is there anything else that you would like to add? Actually, before obviously we wrap up, obviously let people know again about the seminar, when it's starting, and how people can register and order tickets.
Yeah, that would be good. Okay, so how it works on the Blue Lantern is you don't need tickets for the seminars. You just need to get a 1-month membership. So the membership is only £30. You get access to all of our previous courses. There's lots of courses on food and nutrition, marriage. There's emotions and the Islam and the philosophy of emotions course. There's the Wholesome Woman course, which is all about mind, body, and soul, and how to create balance as a spiritual woman. There are so many courses on the Blue Lantern platform for you to access right now. So you buy a 1-month membership, you can cancel anytime you like, and essentially you get access to the live courses for the month that you've signed up for, as well as all the previous courses that we've had on the Blue Lantern. If you want to have a look at the type of things we have on the Blue Lantern, you can just access the Instagram page at the Blue Lantern. I think it's at the Blue Lantern _. If you just go onto the Instagram page, you'll be able to see all of the different types of courses and classes we've had on, and you can have access to all of that in the recording section of the Blue Lantern. So you can go onto the Blue Lantern page, or you can go onto my page and you click the link in my bio, and where it says Blue Lantern, you click it and you click on memberships. You join as a member for a month, and you'll have access to my seminar, which is taking place tomorrow, which is women's only. Then we have a men and women seminar on sexual discipline taking place. What did you say, Habib? When was it?
18.
And then Habib Kande is joining us on the Blue Lantern, which is a big deal for me, guys, because I have been studying Habib's books, especially A Taste of Honey, for years now. And I remember the first time when I came across it, I made so much dua for this man, because I was like, I cannot believe somebody gave us this gift. There was a man that went and translated a hadith for us and gifted us the book of A Taste of Honey, which is all of the traditional hadith, the basic foundational hadith that everyone should know and have access to in terms of sexology in Islam, and after the life of the Prophet ﷺ as well. So it's a big deal for me to have Habib on the Blue Lantern, because essentially I've been his student for a few years now through his books, and now he's finally coming into our space, and he's going to be speaking to our members. It's going to be a private space. He's going to have Q&As. He's going to be delivering his seminars, and it will be recorded, so you get to watch the replay if you can't watch it live as well. So that's how it works on the Blue Lantern. Just get yourself a membership, and you can cancel anytime as well.
Inshallah. Barakallah Fik, Jazakallah khairan. I'll be saving this, and again, I'll put your details, so if anyone wants to obviously follow up, please follow up with Ustadha Iffet. Thank you. Again, I think I've gone slightly over. But no, Jazakallah khairan for your time, and again, all the best for the upcoming seminar, inshallah. I look forward to seeing you on the 26th.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Really looking forward to it. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you again for everyone for joining.